Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video with the recent release of the cast of Big Brother 25, we're finally here with a cast assessment. We're here, I'll obviously be running through the entire cast of the season and talking about my predictions for them and give my winner pick for the season at the very end. Well, let's see if we can keep the streak alive, where if you don't know, I've actually correctly predicted the last 3 winners of Big Brother in my cast assessments. Again, will it happen again? Probably not, but let's see. Now I will mention that this video is coming out on Tuesday, the day after the initial cast release. And obviously considering I typically upload videos on Wednesdays, this video will essentially take the spot of this week's Wednesday video. So again, don't expect a video in that slot this week, as again, I just felt like it was obviously better to get this video out as quickly as possible. But here we do have 16 new players to be going through. But first I do want to talk about my general thoughts on this cast, which is that I kind of love this cast. This cast just feels super refreshing to me. I mean, it very much feels opposed to a lot of modern Big Brother casts, a very older skewing cast. I mean, the average age of this season is the 3rd highest in Big Brother history, the oldest cast since BB10, and even then that was a situation where you had Jerry really skewing the average. So again, I do really like that there's a good chunk of age diversity on this cast, but even just in general, I do feel like this cast does feel very unique. I mean, while there are a few people here and there that do fit into the typical trends that you would see on Big Brother cast, I do feel like for the most part, this cast does again just feel refreshing to me. And I am genuinely excited to see how this cast is going to play out. So that let's start running through the players on the board here, going through them in alphabetical order of first name. And we're going to be starting it off with America, which I'm sure will get a billion puns of her name across this season. But America to me comes off as largely just fine. I mean, she's someone that has declared herself a fan of the show for 15 years now, and in many ways she just kind of reminds me of a type of player that we get on every season, this stereotypical attractive fan of the show that again is more of a casual fan but at least does know the show somewhat well. Again, we had this with like Alyssa and BB24, really even Alyssa and BB23, had this with someone like a JC Lynn and BB Can 10, Claudia and BB Can 11. Like, I feel like this is sort of an archetype that we see pretty often, though I think a minor difference here for America is the fact that she is a little bit older than a lot of the other people we've mentioned. I mean, she is 27 years old, which again, you would think would play to her favor, obviously having more life experience, but really can't shake this archetype out of my head. I just feel like that's kind of the way it's going to go for her. Now, that doesn't mean that she has no chance at winning, as again, a lot of those players that we mentioned made it very far into the game, some with some decent win equity. So I think there is a good chance that America makes it far here. Again, I suspect she'd find herself in the majority alliance. People in her archetype typically do, but in terms of having the gusto to end up winning the game, again, that is a bit of a question mark. But again, I think America could do well here, but just not someone I'm super confident in. Next, I'm moving on to Blue, who I think very clearly comes off as an alternate here. She's the only person on this cast that has not had her interview questions coming from the DR. And also we got very little from her to where, again, I think it's pretty clear that she was an alternate. And again, because of that, I feel like I don't have that great of a read on Blue, especially from a game perspective. I mean, she talks about how she's a brand strategist and she's going to lie about her job because she doesn't want people to know she's a strategist. And I think that just sounds kind of dumb. I mean, I think really just change the name of your job. You don't actually need to call it a brand strategist, call it a brand consultant or something. Like, I mean, for her to take a radical deviation now, wanting to completely lie about her entire occupation seems a bit rash. And I really don't get a good sense of her being that big of a fan. And she does seem pretty recruity to me, but she seems to be a likable person. I feel like she could be someone that's fun to watch. But in terms of her overall game ability, I am left a bit unsure of how exactly she will go here. So again, not someone I'm really looking at too highly. Next, I'm moving on to Bowie, and Bowie is another one that I am not particularly high on. Really, I think Bowie is probably one of the people that came out of watching all the interviews being the lowest on, where I don't think Bowie knows what she's in for. I mean, she is obviously Australian and through that has watched a lot of BBAU, supposedly. However, I don't get a sense that she knows much about BBUS. I mean, she really talks in a lot of generalities about the show, and she talks about BBUS, not really going to any specifics. I feel like in many ways, this kind of reminds me of Indy from last season, who had really only known BB Brazil, and I feel like that's kind of similar vibe I get here, that she's just not going to be that aware of the game that's going on around her, that she's going to not really expect just how strategic of a game this really is. Really really, I just see her as a bit of an outlier on this cast here, to where I'm not expecting to go particularly well. Not necessarily saying that I think she's guaranteed to be an early boot, because I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I don't really see much win equity from her. I don't really see much of a killer instinct in her. So again, not super high on Bowie here. Next, I'm moving on to Cameron. And Cameron is someone that I was really interested at first. I did feel like he came off as a largely affable guy, stay-at-home father, 34 years old, a little bit on the older side of things for Big Brother, but still kind of within the range of where I think you're kind of at your peak from a gameplay perspective on these social strategy shows. And just initially from that, I was kind of interested in his potential in the game. But then when listening to his interviews, I did really like the passion he had in his interviews. I mean, you could tell how much he just really wanted this. He talked about having applied 5 or 6 times in the past and has finally gotten on now. He has this pretty detailed description of his strategy in the game, and I think just as a whole, like, Cameron seems to know what he's doing. I feel like he comes off as one of the bigger fans on the board, and while I do have a little bit of reservations on how he's going to do socially in the house in terms of really making strong bonds, I do feel like as a whole, Cameron is someone I feel pretty good about, because I am moving him on as a potential winner pick. Next, I'm moving on to Corey Wartenberger, who turns out to be the brother of Zach Wartenberger from Survivor 42, aka Survivor 42's first boot. And again, I love Zach Wartenberger in terms of his social media presence. He's obviously made some really well-made YouTube videos, and just in general is a really humorous presence in the online community. Though despite that, this is so random of why is Zach's brother on Big Brother? Now, straight up, I don't think he's cast because he's Zach's brother, obviously. I think Corey was really cast on his own merit. I would actually not be that surprised if they rarely ever mention the fact that he is Zach's brother, though at the same time, they are so similar. I mean, just listening to them talk, they sound exactly the same. They have the same style of humor. They feel like very similar people. However, despite the fact that Zach was the first boot on Survivor, I did feel like Zach had some potential there. I just think he got a pretty bad starting tribe for him, and with Corey coming to Big Brother, I actually do see a lot of potential in Corey. I mean, Corey clearly knows the show. He is a massive fan. You could tell by the way he talks, adding in these little references here and there. Like, I am pretty excited to see Corey here. I think this will be an interesting experiment to see how Corey does on Big Brother in comparison to Zach on Survivor, with them being seemingly similar players. And just in general, I do want to root for Corey, as you could tell how much this game means to him, and because I did end up moving him on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to Felicia, which again, I'm sure we'll get a billion references to her name across this season, but Felicia is 63 years old, the oldest woman to ever play Big Brother US, which is a pretty insane stat. And again, this is a great casting choice in my mind. Like, I am shocked that they were willing to put someone like Felicia on the cast, and I'm very happy that they have. Again, this feels like the type of casting choice that they just simply wouldn't have bothered with years ago, and it is nice to see them really expanding beyond the natural stereotypes that they have on the show. And again, Felicia, I think, is going to be a lot of fun here. Now, I will say gameplay wise, I'm not entirely sure how she's going to go. I do think she's largely affable, and because of that, I don't really see her going early. I'll be surprised if she's an early boot outside of the situation of them just thinking she's an easy first boot because she's different, though again, I don't really see that actually happening. Like, I think she has longevity to her. Again, does she have the killer instinct to really make some moves and gain respect and win the game? I don't know. I don't really see it, but I do think there is some potential upside for Felicia, where I think she's probably in it for a long haul, but again, not someone I'm really considering as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Hassan. Again, another casting choice that is pretty different from what we typically see. I mean, he's someone in his 40s. He is Muslim. He is gay. He's also a doctor. I mean, like, he fits into a lot of these communities that are typically underrepresented on Big Brother, and because that, I am pretty happy that he's on the cast. I do feel like seeing him play the game is going to be really interesting. That being said, I don't see it going well. Hassan to me screams out as first boot in my mind, or at least a very early boot. I've seen people online give him pretty favorable comparisons. However, to me, the person that screams out to me the most is Andrew Gordon from BB12, where Hassan really screams out to me as kind of awkward and pretty intense, to where you could tell that he has this set game plan in his mind, to where, I mean, like, his explanation of his strategy was super detailed, and you can tell, like, just how much he's thought about it. I do feel like that's a bad sign. It seems like he's very strict on the way that he wants to play the game, and to be honest, I don't know if he's going to be able to play the game he wants to play it. He wants to play this, like, Danielle and Jason style strategy, and again, I don't really see it working for him. I want it to work for him. I think he seems like a really likable guy, but in terms of my hopes for him on this season, again, I really just do not see it going well for him. Next up, moving on to Izzy, who is kind of another one of these people that I do really like here. However, another person that I don't feel like I got that much from. Where Izzy, again, is another person for LGBT representation, also has a unique job in being a flutist, and also seems to be a fan of the show. Mind you, she does clarify that she never watched the show up until January of this year. However, since then has watched most seasons multiple times, which I don't even understand how that makes any sense. But again, she seemed to be a fan of the show. And really, in many ways, her story kind of reminds me of that of Evie Jagoda from Survivor 41, who was someone that hadn't watched the show until lockdown, then really binged the show on the road before coming out. And I wonder if that's the way that Izzy's going to be on this season, having this really good knowledge about the events of a lot of seasons simply because she watched them pretty recently. But I don't really get a great sense of how much she's learned from that experience, which I think is the biggest question mark for me. And the fact that, again, I just don't know how game savvy she really is. And because of that, for me, I didn't move her on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Jag. And Jag is another person, again, feels a bit different from a lot of typical casting choices, being a Sikh and Punjabi, and again, representing a lot of underrepresented communities. And again, it's nice to see him on the show here. And I kind of feel pretty good about Jag as well. I feel like Jag just screams out as a pretty chill guy. I mean, he is relatively young, but seems pretty smart, seems to be the type of person that could do pretty well in challenges. Like, Jag just came off pretty solid to me. I feel like there's only one little red flag for me, and the fact that he is going to lie about his occupation, which again is not ideal, but at the same time he is supposedly lying about a job that he actually did have, and again that at least makes it a bit better. But still, overall, feel pretty good about Jag, and because of that, moving on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to another of the big names on this cast, and here we do have Jared Fields, aka Suri's son. Obviously Suri, the legend from Survivor and the winner of the Traitors, and also a person who wants to play Big Brother herself, which makes you question why didn't they put Suri on here. But still very happy to see Jared Fields here. Obviously, we've seen him on Game Changers during the family visit, and he was a really humorous figure there. He was going to be on Survivor David vs. Goliath, but then had to drop out at the very last second. So again, really interesting to see him now on Big Brother. But again, I'm excited for it. I loved his interviews. Again, you could just tell the infectious energy that he has, very similar to his mom. And just the way he talks about the game as well makes it pretty clear that you could how he's learned from his mom, that he has a very similar game view to Suri, and that's all really major positives. My only downside is the fact that he is Suri's son, and I do think, one, again, if you have watched Suri on another show, I feel like you can kind of get that energy from him, but even beyond that, I do feel like there are definitely going to be people on this cast that know who he is, particularly Corey, where while I do think Corey's going to want to work with him early on, I do feel like that is still a little bit of a worry, but still feel very good about Jared here. He's definitely moving on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Kirsten, which finally we have a Kirsten on our show and not a Kristen, considering the fact that I always mispronounce Kristen as Kirsten. But again, Kirsten here, at first I was initially really excited for Kirsten. I feel like from just looking at her cast photo and then the beginning of her interviews, I got pretty good vibes from Kirsten. However, the more and more I listened to her interviews, the more and more kind of disappointed I was, not because her answers were actually that bad, but just the fact that they were super short and didn't really feel like they had much substance to them, to the point where I feel like Kirsten's kind of in this ballpark of someone like a Blue, someone like an Izzy, where I just don't have the greatest read on them just because we didn't get to see much of them. Again, I think it's a shame for Kirsten here, as I think there is potential for Kirsten to be someone that I would be willing to think of as a potential winner pick, but because I just feel like we didn't get to see that much of her, I can't really do it. Kirsten's someone that, again, I'm hoping ends up being fun TV. Again, I'm a little bit unsure of the scope of her fandom of the show, and that's another question mark for me, but again, someone that could potentially be fun. Again, a bit unsure about her gameplay wise. Next up, moving on to Luke. And first instinct, looking at Luke's cast photo, is that he looks like a massive douchebag. My first instinct was that he kind of fits in line with someone like a Brett or someone like a Chris Wiley from BB Can 8, and kind of like a douchey figure, but could potentially get some fun dodo content. However, then we got to his interviews, which the moment I saw him with glasses on, he just instantly screamed out as Kyle from BB24, which is kind of a mixed bag in the fact that Kyle from BB24, I think, was a good player. I think Kyle played a very strong game for most of that season, but then messed it up for himself due to prejudices that he had. And I do feel like Luke does remind me of Kyle on paper. Now, obviously the question is, does Luke have those same prejudices, which I hope he doesn't. But if he doesn't, I actually kind of feel okay about Luke, where if Luke can be only the upsides of Kyle without those major downsides, I feel like Luke could potentially be a really good player, but really still a lot of that is more so just a question mark for me, to where, like, straight up from his actual answers themselves, I don't feel like I got that much of substance from his answers, and it was really just the general vibe that he gave off that kind of gave me the Kyle comparisons. But again, I do think there could be a good player there, but again, I still wasn't confident enough to move him on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Matt. Matt, someone that on paper looks like your stereotypical Big Brother casting choice, this relatively young athletic guy, surfer bro, and again, because that right away didn't feel great about him, but then you find out that he is a gold medalist at the Deaf Olympics. Obviously meaning that he is hearing impaired, which initially I think my instinct would be the fact that I think that's maybe a downside in the fact that obviously it's going to make it harder for him to connect to people. But after listening to his interviews and everything, I don't feel like that's the case. I mean, I feel like he seems like a type of person that would kind of just gel with the house. He seems pretty chill. He seems to be a largely affable presence, though I think the thing that is going to harm him though is his physicality, where he is such a blatant physical presence here to where I would not be surprised if Matt ends up trying to win every competition he plays in, ends up being a massive target on the board, ends up being taken out mid-game. I kind of feel like that's the trajectory I see for Matt here, and I think his interviews kind of back that up as well, to where he does seem like a very casual Big Brother fan, and I do feel like he is someone that, again, I fully expect to win a good chunk of comps. I would not be surprised in the slightest if he is the first HOH, as that just seems like the vibe that he gives off to me. But really, as a whole, again, I think there is some potential there in terms of if he gets to the very end. I think he's a very likable person, someone that I could see winning a jury vote, but someone that I just don't think he's actually going to get there. As well, I do think his story might help him out in the short term, early on in the game. I think by the end, it'll be brought up as a thing to target him for. So again, because of that, not feeling super confident in him winning this season. Next up, moving on to Nicole, who I also really liked on the offset. I do feel like she is someone that came off as essentially strong player. I mean, she seems to be in it for the money, and she seems to be really intelligent, being a political aide, and she's kind of in this perfect age for playing these social strategy games at the age of 30, and really someone that I think could do very well on this season. I see a lot of longevity for Nicole. However, I do feel like Nicole comes off to me as the type of player that I'm expecting longevity from her, but I feel like by the end of the game, I feel like she's going to start to be targeted. Where I think in comparison to Survivor, I think she kind of reminds me of someone like Adrea or Shan, these people who get a lot of control early on in the game, and then by the time the final 7, final 8 rounds, they become massive targets. That's kind of what I see from Nicole here. Like in comparison to Taylor, who was obviously my winner pick last season, I think they are in similar-ish archetypes. I feel like Taylor came off a bit more affable and more personable to me than Nicole. Also, too, for Taylor was just such an anomaly, just in general. But in general, again, Nicole is someone that I could see doing very well. I would like her to do very well, but again, not someone I'm moving on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to one of the more traditional Big Brother casting choices on the board, and here we do have Red, who very much comes off as the generic Southern guy that they're going to go to for funny confessionals. And Red does have a pretty big TikTok following, and just in general, Red does feel like a very fun personality here, to where I think he's going to be a very likable person. However, I do struggle with my opinions on him game-wise, to where based on him talking about the game, he actually does seem to know the game a lot better than I was expecting. He seems to be able to articulate his game better than I was expecting. But I still question a couple of things. I do still question his overall game knowledge, in the sense that I don't know how much Big Brother he's actually watched. I mean, he talks about how he was a fan back in the day and has become a fan again more recently, but that kind of screams out to me that he isn't that big of a fan. And beyond that, I don't really get the sense that he's going to be a pretty cutthroat player. I don't really get the sense that he is going to have the killer instinct to make the moves that he needs to make in the end game, and because that, I'm not feeling super great about his winning chances, though I do think he is going to be a fun character. And finally, the final person to be talking about here is sadly not saving the best for last, and here we do have Riley, who, I'll be honest, I found really bland. I mean, I felt like Riley felt like the most stereotypical casting choice of this entire cast. cast, being the typical younger, attractive girl that's probably going to do well in comps. I mean, she is a captain of sports. She used to be a basketball player. It does seem to be pretty athletic, seems to be a casual fan of the show. And really just in general, like to me, comes off as like a worse version of America. I feel like America probably has more in her to kind of fly under the radar than Riley, where I feel like Riley's going to be this type of person that wins a whole bunch of comps early on. I mean, hopefully without the racism, but it does remind me a bit of Aaron. But that's really just the vibe I get from Riley here. I mean, she's the type of person that seems like she's going to end up in a showmance, seems like she's going to win some comps, and seems to have a base level of strategy in her, but I really do not see it going particularly well, especially by the end game. So again, not someone I'm moving on as a winner pick. But there we go. I mean, that is the entire cast of Big Brother 25. Now let's get to my winner picks, which straight up, I mean, my top 4 here end up all being men. And I do feel like just in general, I feel a lot more confident about the men of this cast. To where while there are a couple women like America and Nicole, I could definitely see doing very well, I feel like a lot of them really just didn't give me that much in terms of their actual games, where again I feel like a lot of the men are really screaming out more so to me as potential threats in the game, so that my top 4 end up being Cameron, Corey, Jag, and Jared. And the first person I'm going to drop of these 4 here is going to be Cameron. Now again, Cameron came off very likable on the offset, and again seems to be a massive fan. However, it was just this lingering thing in my mind the entire time of watching his videos that kind of made me worry that he could be the next Daniel Durston. To where again, I really like Daniel in the preseason of BB24. He was one of my winner candidates by the end. And again, I could see a potential of Cameron kind of being in that spot as well. To where, because I feel like Cameron was the easy one to drop off first. And now we're essentially left with Jag and then the 2 survivor relatives. However, the next person I'm going to cut is Corey. And a lot of this is because I do feel like Corey, while I really want him to do well, and obviously he knows the game pretty well, and I could see a bit of a run in him, I do still worry that he is going to be labeled as being the next coming of an Ian or Steve and end up like Cameron and being the first boot. I do still worry about that for Corey. Now again, if he actually is able to lower his threat level effectively, then I think there is a lot of potential here. I do just worry about that early game for me. That makes me cut him off. And with that, we're at the top 2 for me. That being Jag and Jared. And the person I am picking as my winner pick here is going to end up being Jag. And really, it's extremely close for me, where I think both of them come off as pretty well-rounded players. Again, both of them come off as pretty affable socially. I think both of them seem to be physical enough to win a good chunk of comps, and both of them seem to know the game pretty well, both of them being really big fans. And again, I see a lot of potential in both of them. However, for me, the main deciding factor here was Jared's relation to Suri, where again, as much as I really want him to live up to this potential of being Suri's son and playing the game like her, I do just worry that the fact that he is related to her and the fact that that is probably going to be known, and the fact that he is also going to try to hide that, I think is a worry. I think that is something to worry about. And straight up, if it was not for that fact, I would have picked Jared as my winner pick. If Jared was not related to Suri and had the personality that he had and said all the things that he said in his interview, he would be my winner pick. However, again, I just worry about the Suri connection potentially catching up to him. However, again, I still think Jag is a good pick as well, though. Again, Jag just seems to be someone that's pretty chill. I think he'll get along with most people in the house. I think he knows the game. He talks about being a big fan of the game. Again, I just feel pretty good about Jag here, though again, this was a relatively close choice by the end of it. But there we go. I mean, that is my cast assessment for Big Brother 25. I will be doing similar videos for the season as I've done in the past. I'll be doing a mid-season power ranking at the time of the start of the jury phase, along with a season review that will be very, very long at the end of the season, and then also player ranking at the end of the season. I will also be streaming on Twitch every Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, where I will be talking about Big Brother, obviously, along with whatever other shows are going on, which, spoiler, there will be a lot of shows going on very soon. So you can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMarineReview to catch me there. And just in general, as I mentioned, there's so much stuff coming up. We have the Challenge USA starting very soon. We're going to have the Amazing Race. We're going to have the Survivor 45. We already currently have shows like Claim to Fame going on. We got a lot of Trader seasons coming up. I guess I'm still doing an American Ninja Warrior review because I guess. So again, we got a lot of things coming up that will be fun to talk about. So stay tuned for videos on most of those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.